We're back, gamers! What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to another episode of Best Armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the first episode for the new year, 2024, and it's a new year, so a new Warhammer 40k meta, because we are seeing some results for these past 2 weeks or so from a wide variety of different 40k factions. Now, as always, what we're going to be doing today is breaking down some results for undefeated lists from mostly the past weekend, but we also have an event from the week before. Now, obviously, it has been a little bit of a drought of 40k events recently because we had New Year's and Christmas back-to-back, but this past weekend, that of January 6th and 7th, we did see a lot of competitive events go down, and that's what we're mostly going to be covering today. So, let's dive into the Metagame Breakdown this week. Now, at the top of the list, we still have Chaos Space Marines and Aeldari. Not really to anyone's surprise. Chaos Space Marines with an X-0-1 record at the Vienna Tabletop Championship, as well as wins at Grim Dark New Year's, Born to Game Championship, and DEF CON 2024. Aeldari with a similar result, an X-0-1 record at the Vienna Tabletop Championship and Grim Dark New Year's, but we also saw undefeated results from them at the AZ Warhammer League and Glass City GT. Orks coming in third, wins at the Tavern of Souls, Vienna Tabletop Championship, and Warlords of Walsall, alongside some good results from Death Guard as well. These guys took down the event that took place last week, that being the Warhammer City New Year over in China. Very cool to see some 40k events coming from there, as well as the Last Chancer GT. With that, we have some of the new factions also seeing some results. We saw Necrons and Adeptus Mechanicus come out recently. They haven't been putting up too much results. Obviously, we did have a little bit of a hiatus, so they didn't have the chance to, but Adeptus Mechanicus with 2 undefeated results. Those, unfortunately, both X-0-1, but very high scoring draws. Those at the Exterminatus 8 and Grimdark New Year's event. Necrons with an undefeated result at the Glass City GT, and another faction that, well, it isn't new, although it does have a codex coming out shortly. We haven't seen in the undefeated bracket very often, that being Adeptus Custodes, who also went undefeated at Exterminatus 8. Drawing up the back here, we also have a result from Space Marines. John Lennon going undefeated at Grimdark New Year's with Ultramarines. Leagues of Votann with a draw at Exterminatus 8. And Adepta Sororitas destroying the Hammer in the New Year event with 2 5-0 records from Jeffrey Klodner and Austin Wingfield. Absolutely dominating that single event this week. So let's dive into exactly what these lists looked like for these factions. Starting with Chaos Space Marines, at Grimdark New Year's, Charles Barber went 5-0 with the faction, with a list that should probably at this point look relatively familiar if you have been following this series recently. This list took 3 Chaos Undivided Chaos Lords, 3 Undivided Dark Communes, 1 unit of Cultists, as well as 3 Chaos Rhinos. Those guys were going to embark 3 units of 5 Chosen to attach with the Chaos Lords, alongside 3 units of Accursed Cultists to join in with the Dark Communes, 2 units of Nurglings for support, and 2 Forge Fiends, 1 Chaos Undivided and 1 Nurgle to add some backline shooting. Honestly, the formula for Chaos Space Marines is largely solved at this point, and we have been seeing these lists played with very little change over the last month or two, so I don't know if there's too much to talk about here. We've talked about Chaos Space Marines a lot on the channel recently, especially since they took down the World Championships Warhammer, so we're just going to move to Aeldari. For Aeldari, we'll move over to the Glass City GT and talk about Folger Piles list. This was a battle host running an Autarch Wayleaver with the Phoenix Gem, allowing him to respawn on a 2+1 destroyed. Fuegan the Fire Lord, a Spirit Seer with Fate's Messenger, and the Incarn. The Incarn is being supported by 3 Night Spinners. These guys can slow down enemies and potentially kill light or medium enemy unit, allow the Incarn to teleport to their location for a future charge later in the turn. There's a lot of good synergy between the Incarn and the Night Spinners, even though both of them independently are still incredibly strong by themselves. The triple Night Spinner list with the Incarn is definitely an absolute powerhouse. We also saw 2 sweet units of Swooping Hawks for a utility, a unit of Rangers, 2 units of Warp Spiders, and the big Wraithguard brick. This is a pretty classic Eldar build that we've been seeing so basically since the edition came out. Most of the damage comes from the Incarn and the Wraithguard brick. Those are sort of the darling children of the list archetype. Then a lot of pressure and control comes from the Night Spinners, and we have a ton of utility units to score massive wins in all of those Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders. A classic Eldar list, and very much like the Chaos Space Marines, similar to what we've been seeing last year. So that moves us on to Orks, and Orks actually did take down 3 events this week: the Tavern of Souls GT, Warlords of Walsall, as well as the Vienna Tabletop Championship. Unfortunately, the largest of those, the Tabletop Championships, or their list was hidden after the fact. I don't know why, but unfortunately we can't talk about that one. That was a 66-player GT. So we will move on and talk about the Tavern of Souls event, where Rob Denob took that one down with a 5-0 record. That's what his name is on Best Coast Pairings, which is thematically appropriate. This list was running the 2 big baddies of Orc characters, Ghazghkull Thraka himself, as well as Mazrog Scragbad on his big great white squig. We also saw a Smasher Squig Knob with Held Wapa's Kill Champa to give him devastating wounds that go along with his anti-monster and anti-vehicle, a War Boss with Follow Me Lance to make his unit faster, as well as a Super Cyborg Body War Boss in Mega Armor to make him more resilient. We got 2 units of Orc Boys, 2 units of 10 Gretchen, 2 units of Mega Knobs, 1 of 3 and 1 of 2. Probably one of them for the Mega Armor War Boss to join into, the other one to act as a bit of a bodyguard for Ghazghkull Thraka. That allows him to use his leadership ability and take a couple of wounds before he finally has to decide to take saves either on himself or on Makari, which smooths out his resilience as he's moving up the table. We also then see a big unit of Knobs, 10 Knobs with Power Claws, 2 units of 5 Storm Boys for utility, a big Squighog Boy unit of 6 with 2 Bomb Squigs to attach with the Smasher Squig Knob, 3 custom Mega Cannon Mech Guns for cheap utility and to add a little bit of firepower, alongside 3 trucks to embark those big combat units and get them up the table. Pretty standard Orc list, but it has been a little while since we've seen the heavy characters, especially Mazrog Scragbad on the table. So it's cool to see him alongside all the Beast Snagga Boys units to add a lot of fast anti-vehicle hitting into the army. Also lower key, kind of cool to see less of a focus on the transport Orc lists. I know those are extremely powerful, but the transport lists, at least speaking personally, tend to be a little bit less interesting. The ones that start more characters and more cavalry on the table, I think are cooler, although probably less flexible than the truck or battle wagon filled lists. With that, we'll move on to Adepta Sororitas, who also had 3 undefeated results, 2 of them at the same event, actually. The Hammer in the New Year event was dominated by Adepta Sororitas. We'll talk about the number 1 list from that event, this being Jeffrey Kalodner. Jeffrey was playing an Imagifier with Litanies of Faith, Junith Eruita to generate some command points for the army. Adepta Sororitas are a faction that are very good at performing actions and throwing away cheap units to score secondaries, so they are an army that oftentimes want to lock in fixed secondaries rather than tactical, which obviously restricts the amount of command points that you can gain over the course of the game, but Junith smooths that out. We then have Morven Val alongside a Paladin with the Blade of St. Eleanor, a Missionary with Saintly Example to generate miracle dice when he dies, with a massive number of Battle Sister squads, 4 Battle Sister squads rocking Max Meltas. 2 of those are going to be jumping into Immolators and splitting into combat squads. The Immolators allowing them to split into 2 units of 5 and potentially be gaining reroll wounds from fire support. We then had 1 Rhino to embark a 3rd squad, a Retributor squad, that is probably where that Palatine is jumping into, a Retributor squad with 4 Multi-Meltas, a Castigator, 2 Castigators with battle cannons, 2 Mortifiers to act as utility, and a unit of Paragon Warsuits to join Morven Val into. We then had 1 unit of Sisters Novitiates alongside 2 Crusaders and a Calidus Assassin. One thing that's interesting about this list is that it's not bringing the classic Dialogus and the Triumph of St. Catherine combo. Instead, we're just using maximum multi-meltas from these Battle Sister squads to push damage through, and with the massive number of small units that the army can get between its auxiliary units like its Mortifiers and Crusaders alongside the Battle Sister squads combat squatting themselves, you'll probably get enough miracle dice to supercharge those multi-meltas to get the damage through that you need to. Also, being a voluminous army with lots of small individual units, it's incredibly strong in scoring, and the stuff that Sisters can't kill, they can usually outscore. That moves us on to Death Guard, who had 2 undefeated results. They did have 1 result on the Lance Transfer GT that had a draw on the profile, so we will talk about their other event from China Warhammer City. This was Renshin Li, who was running 3 Biologus Putrefires and a Foul Blight Spawn. Those to go along with an extremely Plague Marine heavy composition, that bringing 1 unit of 10 Plague Marines and 4 units of 5. Those were going to embark into 3 Death Guard Rhinos, so 2 units of 5 into 2, and then the 1 unit of 10 into the 3rd one. Following that up is a Death Guard Cultist squad to add a little bit of backline objective holding and the ability to get their detachment ability of objective secured out more easily, alongside 3 Plague Burst Crawlers, 2 units of Nurglings, and 3 War Dog Brigands. This is a pretty standard composition as we've been seeing. Death Guard are one of the armies in the game that are probably the most keyed towards supporting allied units. Those War Dog Brigands get the benefits of most of the Contagions of Nurgle because they debuff enemy stats rather than buffing their own faction units, meaning that they're going to be -1 to be hit potentially, depending on the contagion that you choose. They also give Death Guard a lot of good direct fire shooting and fast units that the faction doesn't necessarily have access to by themselves. That gets backed up by Plague Marines, which are one of the most efficient combat units in the game. They have solid shooting and excellent melee, especially when buffed by Death Guard characters, and you have Plague Marine Crawlers to add a little bit of indirect fire barrage to your opponent's army. Altogether, a very effective combination. So with that, let's move into some of the newer codexes. We will start with Adeptus Mechanicus. Alexander Engelsauce went 4-0-1 with them at Exterminatus 8, where he ended up drawing with the third place player playing Leagues of Votann for that undefeated record. And I believe this was, if I remember correctly, a 75-point draw, which is a relatively high-scoring draw. This list was running a Skitarii Hunter cohort, the stealth-focused detachment out of Adeptus Mechanicus. This gives them access to a lot of super powerful abilities, the ability to forward deploy a lot of stuff, redeploy it after the roll to go first, and also lone operative their infantry units, which can make them much more difficult to pull off objectives. This army was running 3 Skitarii Marshals, one of them with the Battlesphere uplink, one of them with Clandestine Infiltrator, and one with Veiled Hunter. The powerful enhancements on these Skitarii Marshals are really one of the highlights of the Skitarii Hunter cohort detachment. That Battlesphere uplink allows the unit to fire and fade, essentially, so move out, shoot, then move back. The Skitarii Marshal with the uplink can potentially be allowing his unit to just constantly be dealing damage to the opponent, or even moving faster, since they can give their entire unit assault weapons using their Doctrina Imperatives to allow themselves to push even further up the table, shoot, and then move farther forward if they need to take objectives or complete secondary objectives. That unit is incredibly strong, and the army gets incredible mid-board control thanks to the combination of Clandestine Infiltrator, which allows an entire unit of Skitarii with that attached Marshal to infiltrate and scout 6 inches, the combination of effects that makes Space Marine scouts so important. Plus, Veiled Hunter allows you to redeploy units after the roll to go first, meaning that you can deploy those infiltrators way out in the front of the table. The unit is relatively large, so it's able to spread out in basically across the entirety of the battlefield, prevent enemy infiltrators from dropping in, and then after the roll to go first, just redeploy back into a safe position and use their scout move. Those combinations of enhancements are being attached to a ton of Skitarii units that are going to be taking up the table, including 1 Ranger squad and 6 units of Skitarii Vanguard. Those are going to be embarked into 4 Scorpius Dune Riders, or at least most of them will be embarked. 2 of them will have to ground pound. But we also have 2 units of Taraxi Skystalkers to act as utility, and a unit of Taraxi Sterilizers, alongside 3 units of 10 Taraxi Sterilizers. Those Sterilizers are an incredible combination with the Hunter cohort. They benefit from a lot of the different synergies within the detachment. They get reroll wound rolls and automatically hit with their torches, because they are flamer weapons, when they're near battle line units. Fortunately, the army includes 7 10-man battle line units, so that's going to be relatively easy to pull off, but then they synergize with basically every stratagem that the detachment brings to them. If they target enemy units that have no other friendly units within 6 inches of them, they can get +1 to wound, and +1 to wound with a full rerolling unit is potentially a lot of damage. On top of that, they can also get +1 AP from Binaric Offensive. They can go back into Strategic Reserve and then use their own Deep Strike to redeploy with Programmed Withdrawal. And they also get the benefits of potential Lone Operative from Shroud Protocols, which is good for a relatively squishy unit that is going to be jumping around the table, so it can get into awkward places to score secondaries. Basically, all of these stratagems synergize extremely well with Sterilizers, and focusing on those maneuverable and relatively hard-hitting units that are good at scoring secondary objectives is incredibly strong for an army that's already so good at scoring primary, given the fact that it has 60 Skitarii Vanguard in it. One of the best units at stealing objectives away from your opponent thanks to their ability to reduce enemy objective control. This army's also running Inquisitor Kyria Draxus, who can not only make another unit more difficult to target with enemy range attacks, but also, if she's embarked into a Scorpius Dune Rider, gets a big benefit from that Dune Rider's fire support. And Draxus, with a lot of 2 damage attacks, including a devastating wounds gun, can add a ton of additional damage to a Skitarii unit. While this army doesn't look like a normal Adeptus Mechanicus list that's focused on big tanks and big laser cannons and stuff like that, it is incredibly strong and incredibly difficult to deal with if you're not prepared to fight the scale of high OC, hard to shoot at infantry that it's going to be bringing. So that moves us on to Necrons. Necrons at the Glass City GT that did go 5-0 with a Canoptek court. Randy Brigham was running a Canoptek court that had a bit of a split focus between all of the different synergies that the Canoptek court can bring to the table. Now, the Canoptek court has a really interesting army mechanic. It gives its Canoptek units and units with attached cryptex rerolls if you control half the objectives in the area of the table that you are within. They always get it in their own deployment zone. If you control half the midboard objectives, they'll also get it within the midboard, and if you take your opponent's deployment zone objective, then within the opponent's deployment zone. This allows them to synergize well with units like Canoptek Wraiths and potentially even Scarab Swarms, but also allows them to attach cryptex into infantry units like Immortals to get ridiculous damage out of those guys. The army was bringing 2 Overlords with Translocation Shrouds to allow their unit to auto-advance 6 inches, alongside 1 Plasmancer and a Chronomancer with 2 Technomancers. One of the Technomancers was equipped with the Dimensional Sanctum to give his unit Infiltrator. He was going to be attached into a unit of Canoptek Wraiths to allow them to forward deploy up the table and project a lot of threat and a lot of resilient objective holding onto a midboard objective from the beginning of the game. We then had the 2 combinations of Overlords with attached cryptex. Now, the Overlords, not only do they allow their unit to move more quickly with their Translocation Shroud, but also get a Rites of Battle effect, allowing them to use a stratagem for free. The stratagem in question is the Cynosure of Eradication, which grants the unit their devastating wounds if they're wholly within your power matrix, giving you rerolls. You're probably only going to use it on a unit benefiting from rerolls, and with the fast units like Canoptek Wraiths, it's easy to gain rerolls at the end of your movement phase or your shooting phase, so that shouldn't be a problem. And with the combination of those effects, it allows a unit of 10 Immortals to get full hit rerolls with Tesla weapons, potentially get a bonus to their critical hits thanks to the Plasmancer attached to one of the units. Those hit rerolls come from the power matrix and allow them to get a lot of sustained hits out of that unit. If they target an enemy on an objective, they also reroll their wound rolls, and that allows them to fish for devastating wounds. Now, to further pump this combination, we also had Illuminor Ceres. This guy allows battle line units to get +1 AP on their own guns, and this detachment has a solar pulse as well, allowing them to potentially be ignoring cover for a command point. So you can push even the regular shooting, the non-devastating shooting, from an Immortal squad up to AP1 and ignoring cover, which is pretty good, but they also reduce incoming AP targeting that unit as well. The Chronomancer in the list also allows his unit to survive a little bit longer. The downside of Immortals is that even with Illuminor Ceres' buffs, they aren't the hardest thing in the game to kill, so usually they will move out, enact their combo, get full rerolls to hit and wounds, sustained hits and devastating wounds, do a ton of damage to something, then get vaporized on the swing back. But the Chronomancer allows the unit to fire and fade back into a safe position, allowing them to potentially, while they do less damage each time they shoot, because we don't have the benefit of the Plasmancer in that unit, fire more often, which is good. Turns out shooting twice is usually better than shooting once with an extra critical hit. Following that up are 2 Catan Shards. We had a Catan Shard of the Nightbringer and Catan Shard of the Void Dragon to add a resilient core to the army and some counterpunch, alongside those 2 units of Immortals to attach those Cryptex and Overlords, 2 units of Canoptek Wraiths to attach the Technomancers, 2 units of Tomb Blades to act as utility, and a single Locust Destroyer for largely the same reason. Overall, I really like that this list splits its focus across the multiple really powerful benefits that Canoptek Core can grant. I've seen a lot of lists that skew either really heavily into Canoptek units with things like Doomstalkers and Max Wraiths, or skew really heavily into Immortals, taking multiple units of Immortals and even things like Lichguard. I think those tend to be more skewier, and an army like this looks like it's going to be a lot more flexible and have a lot better matchup, and have a better swath of good matchups simply because of the amount of tools that it brings to the table. And that moves us on to another faction that I'm excited to talk about, Adeptus Custodes, an army that we haven't talked about in a really long time, but Tim Neal did take them to a 5-0 result at the Exterminatus 8 event. Tim was playing an army focused very heavily on Venatari Custodians, which I think are one of the most exciting units inside the index currently, although they are in the Forge World part of the index, but I don't know, don't at me. This army was rocking Trajan Valoris, 2 units of 5 Custodian Guard, as well as 1 unit of 4, a single Caladius Grav Tank to add some long-range anti-tank shooting, alongside a lot of scouts actually, 1 unit of Witch Seekers and Eversor Assassin for early screening and utility. Moving on from there, we had 2 units of Venatari Custodian. These guys allow you to use Rapid Ingress for free on them and even duplicate it if you've used it earlier in the phase, which allows you to bring in multiple units from Rapid Ingress whenever you want to, which is incredibly strong. Now that things like Rites of Battle effects have been nerfed so that they can't be used on stratagems like rapid ingress that are not battle tactics, effects like the Venatari Custodian's ability is super duper good. Allows you to potentially deep strike in a unit like Custodian Guard, then also bring in 2 units of Venatari on this same exact turn, allowing you to wildly swing where the line of engagement of the battlefield is. If your opponent doesn't have everything screened out at the end of their own movement phase, you're going to be able to put those Venatari Custodians in an annoying spot and then hammer them super hard, punishing them for their indiscretion. The downside, obviously, is that they are extremely expensive, which is why we haven't been seeing Adeptus Custodes at the top of the metagame in a little while. But that said, obviously, Tim is able to make it work, and hopefully we will see them do a lot better with some points changes in the upcoming data slate later this month. That moves us on to Space Marines, everyone's favorite blue boys. John Lennon did take Space Marines to an undefeated record at the Grimdark New Year event. Now, we've actually talked about John Lennon's list in the past. This is his classic Vanguard Spearhead, which has been gained a ton of popularity after his almost winning results at the World Championships of Warhammer. John Lennon is rocking an Apothecary Biologus with blade driven deep in that Vanguard Spearhead to give his attached unit infiltrate. He's going to be attached into Marneus Calgar alongside a 6-man aggressor squad, able to put a very fast, incredibly lethal, hard-hitting heavy infantry unit in the middle of the table from the beginning of the game. If you don't want to infiltrate that big brick of models, you could also use Uriel Ventress's ability to put them into Deep Strike, which is very good because he allows them to Deep Strike for the entirety of the game, meaning that if you use the Vanguard Spearhead stratagem to put them into Strategic Reserve at the end of your opponent's turn, they can then Deep Strike back on the table the next turn instead of just redeploying normally. The combination is incredibly strong, and Uriel Ventress is also a pretty decent combat unit, and he's bringing a unit of company heroes to attach alongside in order to act as a little bit of a late game punch. That allows that unit to put out a massive number of 2 damage strength 6 melee attacks, which is good at clearing a lot of late game objective holding units. We then have a big unit of Centurion Devastators. These guys can also benefit from the Deep Strike from Uriel Ventress, so they can be jumping around the table as well if you want to use it on them instead of Marneus Calgar. You have the option at the beginning of the game, and either one is pretty useful. That allows the Centurion Devastators to use the uppy downy stratagem to jump around and get targets with their twin las cannons. If you Oath of Moment their target, they're going to be rerolling hit rolls from Oath of Moment, wound rolls from Twin Linked, and probably killing whatever you're shooting at, especially with the benefit of +1 AP and +1 ballistic kill from Strike from the Shadows if you want to supercharge their ranged attacks. Last but certainly not least, we had 2 Eradicator squads, 3 Inceptor squads, 2 of 6 and 1 of 3. Those big 6 model squads do have Deep Strike, and they can use their Meteoric Descent to come in 3 inches away from enemies when they use Guerrilla Tactics to go up into reserve, so you could potentially be starting them on the table, jumping into reserve at the end of your opponent's first turn, and then immediately jumping them back in on the bottom of the first battle round to blow something up or score secondaries as you need. We then had 3 units of Space Marine Scouts to act as utility and a Calidus. This army hits very hard and is extremely maneuverable, very good for scoring, and has a lot of chaff infantry that are good for holding down objectives and scoring your objectives, and it's been seeing a lot of success since John Lennon first began playing it. And with that, we'll move on to the last faction we have to talk about today, Leagues of Votann, where William Wyckoff took them to an X-0-1 record, tying with the second place finisher to retain an undefeated record. William was playing a Brokir Ironmaster alongside 2 Calls, one of them with Long List, one of them with Grim Demeanor. We had 1 unit of Hearthkin Warriors, as well as 4 Sagitors. 2 of those Sagitors were going to embark the Hearthkin Warriors, which could then split into combat squads to fill the 2, and then 2 of them were going to be filled with Chthonian Berserks. We also had 1 big unit of 6 Brokir Thunderkin, 2 units of 10 Ernhir Hearthguard, alongside 3 units of Hernkin Pioneers. While we don't see too much of the heavy armor that Leagues of Votann are famous for, the 4 Sagittors filled with units allows the army to present a lot of forward pressure on the opponent that they then have to react to, which is difficult to do when you're also worried about Hearthguard rapid ingressing into annoying places on the table to pop in and deliver devastating shooting and strong melee as well. These lists are very good at scoring with the massive number of utility units they have and the speed they have, especially on the first turn. They are a little bit weaker going second, which is the downside, I think, right now of Leagues of Votann, but generally their units are efficient enough to be able to overcome that deficiency. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for the first week of 2024. Let me know down in the comment section which army was your favorite and which armies you want to see doing better in the 2024 season as we're moving into the first data slate of the year. Big congratulations to all these players for going undefeated. Thanks to you for watching all the way to the end of the video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.